Hi, it's Steve Hargadine. Welcome to the closing session of our 2015 School Leadership Summit, Future Ready Schools. It's been a great day. We sure appreciate your joining us today. Hopefully you've had a good day. All of these recordings will be posted within a day on YouTube, and they'll be ready at the site, the futureready.education website. We'd like to give a huge shout out and thanks to TCAL, the primary movers and shakers for this event. They've been terrific partners. This is our third School Leadership Summit, and the idea of focusing on the Future Ready Schools program was theirs, and they've done a terrific job organizing the day's events. We would also like to express our appreciation to the partner organizations, many of whom are represented in this session. We appreciate the support and the concerted effort to work together to create a really good day of learning. I'm now going to turn the time over to Roland Baker.
Thank you, Steve, and thank all of you for agreeing to be with us here today and share your expertise as we go out across the United States, and thank you for joining from all over the United States. What I'm going to do is ask you a general question to each one of you. We'll start with Andrea Bennett, but in your reply, if you would let us know who you are and what you do. So, Andrea, to you, what do you see the major challenges facing school systems that maybe want to be future ready?
Okay, my name is Andrea Bennett. I'm with the California Educational Technology Professionals Association. I'm the executive director, and we support the IT professionals working in schools, supporting everything from clocks and bells and security systems to admin systems and, of course, classroom technology. You know, in the interest of time, I won't list all the major challenges, but I'll just say that I think that school leaders and county leadership needs to make sure they include all the stakeholders as they move forward with their plans to be future ready, and that their plans should be based on their community. Don't try to take a plan that you saw work somewhere else and just plug it in. Make sure that you take a look at your community, talk to your stakeholders, make sure that your CTO or your IT director or whatever the title is, make sure that that person is at the table for all of the conversations so that the systems can all work together.
Thank you, Andrea. So, Mike Lawrence, what do you see as the major challenges facing our school systems that maybe want to be future ready?
Well, thank you. And you asked us to introduce ourselves. I'm Mike Lawrence, and I'm CEO of CUE. We are based in California, Nevada, like Andrea and CETPA, and we're partners with them as well as many of the other folks on the call. I think time is the biggest barrier, and so I think what we find in terms of school leaders, in addition to what Andrea pointed out, just the ability to prioritize and to make sure that they're focused in on the top priorities first, instead of dealing with the minutia or getting sidetracked by less crucial issues. I think that accurate prioritizing, that working together with school board or trustee members to prioritize accurately so that the superintendent and their teams can then execute based on those priorities, that will help free up the time necessary to do it. I think there is a long-standing myth that incorporating technology into schools will somehow take more time, and if you do it properly, I think most of us on this call would argue that if you're doing it correctly, it frees up time. And so I would just have everyone step back, work with their school board and their trustees, and establish priorities to make sure that you're not being sidetracked by less crucial things to help get on the road to future ready.
Thank you, Mike. Some good thoughts there. Keith, how about you? What do you see as the major challenges facing school systems that maybe want to be future ready?
Thanks, Roland. It's great to be here. I'm CEO of CoSN, the Consortium for School Networking, and we are a national association for school system leaders, primarily school districts, who strategically want to use technology to improve teaching and learning. And while we're a technology association, we really do have a core value, and that is that the biggest challenge we face, I guess in this instance of being future ready, is not primarily technical or technological, but is essentially human. And so that's not to say there aren't technical or challenges. We have many challenges around the infrastructure and understanding devices and what's the right solution. But the biggest, what we call the big hairy problem, is effectively human. It's the old Pogo cartoon, I've seen the enemy and it is us. And so helping us to see what our new jobs are in a world with the exciting opportunities that technology offers is what we would say.
Thank you. Tom, how about you? If you could let us know what you think is the major challenges facing our school systems that want to be future ready. And in your reply, let us know a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Great, thanks. Tom Murray here from the Alliance for Excellent Education. I spent 14 years in a public school as a teacher, as a principal, and then as a tech director, and have been at the Alliance for about a year. We fortunately have had the opportunity to put on the summits nationwide with our coalition partners, and seeing many of the coalition partners just on this panel as well. It has been an incredible team effort. So to address your question, I would say first and foremost, having worked with about 500 school leadership teams, almost 2,000 school leaders in about the past 5 months, it really comes down to a variety of themes, regardless if we were in Vancouver, Washington, Atlanta, Georgia, or Baltimore, Maryland. And I would say that one of the biggest struggles is truly districts having a systemic plan of implementation. We're always so device focused. Walk around any of our conferences and what you'll hear is, Chromebooks and Chromebooks and iPads and iPads. We're one-to-one, and quite often we're focused in that conversation on the wrong one in the one-to-one, and we need to make sure that we are kid-focused in that conversation. So alongside of that, it's making sure that we have the right focus, and that is from a student end, and that we're not device-focused. Buying the devices is the easy part. Putting them in hearts and in hallways is what districts are doing nationwide, but very often they're not seeing any sort of gains academically. So how do we make sure that it's systemically planned, put in place, so that at the end of the day, teaching pedagogy and instructional pedagogy in the classroom and teaching mindsets change, because that is the difficult part, and that is the challenge of changing the instructional pedagogy in the class. Simply put, in too many places, we've got 21st century tools in 20th century learning environments. So how do we transform that learning environment to leverage the power of technology and leverage that all that is at our fingertips and available to our kids to empower teachers and empower students?
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. And we have also Brian Lewis, who's with us from ISTE. Brian, what do you see as the major challenges facing our schools that may want to be future ready? And as you reply, let us know who you are and what you do.
Thanks, Roland. Sorry I had to pop off there. I had some bad connectivity issues here, speaking of which. I'm Brian Lewis, CEO of ISTE. Great organization. I've been with almost 3 years now. Of course, ISTE, the ISTE standards and essential conditions guide our work. Know many of you very well. ISTE, we're here right before the conference. It's a harried, insane time. But I would say for us, the conversation, like it is for everybody else, is ever more about the professional learning component. It seems like we've been talking about this for a long, long time, but it would appear from some of the conversations around the country and beyond that the allocation of effort, focus, resources to this nice job there, to this conversation about professional learning is huge. We're not talking to a foundation who's looking to give money to schools or to a district. We always try to redirect the conversation. You're distracting me there, Roland. No, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's all right.
That was my compadre.
That was too fun. That was too fun to miss.
Sorry about that.
No, when foundations are talking about providing resources to schools, they're thinking hardware. And so the conversation always has to go back to, and is increasingly going back to, the conversation about three pieces, not just hardware. What's the plan? What's the local education plan, and what is your intent relative to tying technology to learning objectives? And two, what is your investment, and how are you going to invest in the professional learning that needs to take place before you drop in the technology? So I would say the conversation is really about professional learning.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. So as we move along here, I would like to ask Tom, when we look at curriculum, instruction, and assessment, I know you've been working now in the Future Ready School system. Could you answer, looking at where the Department of Education in the U.S. thinks they would like to go in a direction to help us with curriculum, instruction, and assessment? What's on their windshield that, from your perspective, you see coming up here in the next year or so?
Sure. I don't want to answer on behalf of the department, but what I will say is, working as their partners and putting on all of these summits, one of the things is this whole conversation is about high-quality teaching and learning and making sure that we have that high-quality digital content. So if we're going to relate it back to one of our pillars in the pledge, one of the aspects of the pledge is that high-quality digital content. When we take a look at the things that are online, there is a lot of stuff that's out there, but there's a lot of junk that's out there. So how do we know what's online and what is high quality? One of the things, and speaking of the department, that Richard Collada, he gave a TED Talk that I really, really enjoyed, and one of the things he talked about is we're often in the position where we're digitizing worksheets, where we take the old worksheet, we scan it, we put it on a PDF, we put it on a computer, now we're calling it digital learning, and we're wondering why it's having no impact. So as we move forward, I think we're going to continue to see software that is smart, software that will level to a student's ability. So if a child needs additional practice, it may lower the level if a child is not being successful. In the same sense, it'll push the child higher. That's an example of that type of software that's certainly been around for a few years now, that schools are starting to use more and more. But I think we're going to continue to focus more on the right stuff. And what I mean by that, it's not the drill and kill of online resources and that just replaced a worksheet. It's about how do we create and how do we use technology to allow students to get to those higher order thinking skills, whether it's Bloom's taxonomy or Webb's depth of knowledge, whatever our reference point is for that. How are we utilizing technology to get to those skills? Because at the end of the day, it is about high quality teaching and learning, and it's not about, now that I have a computer, now I can just type it or research something. If we're just using those low level skills, all the research will indicate we're wasting our money. But when we utilize the technology well for high quality teaching and learning in that instructional practice, it can obviously, as we know, expand boundaries and make things that were never before possible for all kids. From a curriculum sense, what I would say, what we'll start to see more of is, right now we're really kind of working backwards quite often. We buy stuff, and then we say, now that we have the iPads, what's the curriculum that we need to support the standards that we have or whatever we're doing? Or now that we have the Chromebooks or the HPs or whatever and those are great devices, by the way. I don't say that in a derogatory sense, but from a district end, now that we have the device, how do we change our curriculum? Now that we have the device, how do we change our assessment, as opposed to what do we want our teaching and learning to look like, and how does the device help us get there? How do we want our assessments to change? How does the device help us get there? That's two different ways of looking at it, and too often we're leading with the device as opposed to leading what do we want. What are we learning by starting defining what do we want teaching and learning in our classrooms to look like? That needs to be the premise of all of these conversations, as opposed to, we've got this dollar amount, we can buy this amount of devices, who can now do our Chromebook training? That's just not working out there. And so focusing on that teaching and learning from a curriculum standpoint with higher order teaching, or higher order teaching, which is always just going back to that high quality instruction. And it's just high quality teaching and learning is really what it's about.
Thank you. Andrea, when we had our introductory question, you talked about time being an issue that many people face in their districts. I know that in one of the frameworks, use of time is an area that is big to the Department of Ed. How might some of the roles that you play with CETPA help a district in how they utilize time, either in instructional in the classroom, or maybe not having to, for lack of something better to say, fiddle so much with the technology, but have it more embedded in just the way they do business?
Yeah, well, actually, I think it was Mike who talked about the time. So if you want to jump in here, Mike, I won't take that away from you. But it has to do with, in my opinion, staffing appropriately and training appropriately. The devices have to work, the technology has to work, and when it doesn't, you need to be able to fix it right away. Whether that's a student in the classroom knowing how to do that, or whether that's a classified person, on hand to do that. It's just something that needs to continuously be addressed. We used to call it maintenance, now we're calling it sustainability, but it's all the same thing. You need to make sure that people are there to support each other and make sure that it works. The minute it doesn't work, everybody's frustrated and they throw up their hands and they want to stop using it. And that's, where the training comes in. You got to have ongoing, consistent training. Everything changes so fast. Now we've got apps that keep us up to date on the changes to the apps. So things are just continually changing, and you've got to have that support in the background there.
Thank you, Andrea. And Mike, let's go to you on that too, since you had that in your answer. How do you see the use of time being a critical issue as we start moving forward in these areas?
I'm glad you focused on it. I think it is crucial. I think that the use of tools, as I mentioned before, and prioritization, working with the board and trustees to do that. The other thing I think I would suggest, and it sort of takes me to this other concept, is oftentimes what drives the conversation, what drives actions, for better or worse, is the assessment, and it's what gets out there and what the story is being reported. And so, keying off of something Tom said, I think that we should be looking at reinventing the way that we're creating assessments. We're in the beginning phases at Q on something we're calling the Innovation Index, and what we're hoping to do is work with some partners to create a new assessment that measures schools based on creativity and self-directed learning and passion-based learning. Examples are things like how many times have students or faculty at the schools edited a Wikipedia entry or created a new one? How many Creative Commons licenses have been issued? How many apps have been developed? How many hours of code? If we could somehow condense all of those detailed quantitative data into a number, give a scale of 1 to 10, this school is a 7.2, this school is a 6.5, I think that would help us change the conversation. It would help us change our priorities based on what we're measuring. Instead of, the way I say it is that we're measuring creativity over memorization, quality over quantity, publishing over digesting, contribution over consumption, collaboration over isolation, and invention over imitation. And if we can get there, I think we'll have a powerful change. And I think that would then refocus priorities, which would free up time and allow people to be looking at the right things. So not maybe what you were looking for in an answer, but hopefully it helps.
No, but let me probe just a little bit further, Mike, because what you're saying is probably the silver bullet that a lot of people have been looking for a long time. How do we go about measuring those elements? I think it's a brilliant idea. We've gone from the point of looking at data-driven decision makings only on standardized test scores.
Right.
How would you see something like this being that what we've always heard is that it's just too expensive to measure those kind of items. Do you see that this would be something in our future that we possibly might have a handle on?
I think it is, and we've had some good preliminary conversations with Brightbytes, who I'm sure you know is in this business of assessing data across districts and across a large swath of data to be drawn from. But I think that leveraging things like school IP addresses, there's going to be a bank, and Andrea probably knows this a heck of a lot better than I do, but or Keith, there's a bank of IP addresses that are assigned to school A and a bank of IP addresses assigned to school B, and you could fairly quickly be able to determine, have they edited wikipedia.org? Have they applied for a Creative Commons license and linked back to it from their school presence? Those things are now, because the world is so linked, trackable without violating student privacy. We could look at school-wide aggregate data and track the kinds of things I'm talking about. Hours of code is reported. That's something that you could look at those IP addresses. Brightbytes has pointed out that often you can get very good data just from anecdotal interviews. You can track these kinds of things when you interview a large enough set of students and faculty in some of these ideas. So it's not an easy task. I don't mean to suggest that it's somehow easy, but I think it is doable given how the world has become networked.
Okay, so Mike, you bring up some really interesting peeks into maybe our future.
Okay, there's no rewarmed stuff. This is all fresh A game. I have to make sure that Brian's on his toes for his big week next week.
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad you've framed that. So Brian, I would like your take on just kind of what Mike said, because I know you work and partner with a lot of organizations. How do you think some of this vision might come forward? Are we going to see a measurement and assessment that might help us with creativity and innovation in our schools?
Well, hold on a second. I did bring my crystal ball with me to Philadelphia. I've got it just right over here. I think that's the $64 million question that we've been grappling around for what? How long now? I think the issue is everyone is at different places along this path, right? And we sometimes make a false assumption that someone's where I am. I'm here. Are you? You're right there. And sometimes we forget that there are people that are not where we. What I love about ISTE, what I love about the ISTE conference, is that everybody who is here is all over the spectrum. They're coming here trying to solve the answer together. They don't always agree, which is part of what makes it a vibrant community. But the answer to assessment, I mean, God knows what the answer to that question is. We are in a moment in time where we can continue to, as Tom was saying, we have this notion that we've got this mismatch between what we think a classroom should look like, what it looked like when we were in it, what is it looking like today, how are we going to evolve the assets to make a difference. We've seen too many places where you couldn't even get to assessment because there was no learning plan in place. The technology was dropped in place. Assessment, a schmeshment. I talked to one superintendent of a private school who said, a parent, they bought the tablets for everybody. It was a dismal failure because there was no plan, there was no professional development. Assessment of what? They got rid of the tablets at the end of the school year and sold them back to the parents at a discounted price because it was such a dismal failure. So before you can even get to assessment, we need to be able to ask what it is that we really want, and this is where we've been missing the mark the whole time. What is it that we're trying to achieve? It isn't about the use of technology. It's, as Tom was saying earlier, it's about the connecting of learning objectives to transform the educational experience for the student, where the student is creating the learning by his or her own hand and mind as they are experiencing the technology that empowers them to do that. I couldn't do that with a Smith Corona eraser cartridge typewriter in 1976. I didn't have that capacity. It isn't the same thing today. You can empower a student in a completely different way. I want to figure out how we do that in an equitable fashion. We have greater success by virtue of my own bias. People are accessing and using the ISTE standards and essential conditions to have a path forward, so they have resource and collaboration along the way. But I think assessment is Mike raises a great point, but I think the question really is, let's get some work done now and worry less about assessment and empower educators to do what they know how to do, and take the folks who are a ways down the path, connect them with the people who are trying to do that work in their own schools, and empower them to collaborate for success.
Thank you, Brian. And I know you hit hard as well as Tom on the real need out there for systemic plans, that it needs to be something that drives it. So it sounds like you're saying with the systemic plan in place, the assessment would come out of that, whether it's a more creative event or yeah. Okay, very good. Thank you. Tom. Oh, wait a second. Keith, I wanted to, yeah, go ahead. Tom?
No, go over to Keith. I was going to jump in on use of time before you move forward, but go over to Keith.
Okay. So Keith, just real quick, I wanted to ask your opinion of one that deals with a lot of partners out there that your organization works with and that are looking at ways to assess, ways to help schools. How do you see Mike's crystal ball from your perspective?
Well, I think that it was an interesting discussion we were just having, and that is, what does assessment look like? But I would prefer that we start with the question of what does learning look like? And from my perspective, we allow the tail of assessment to wag the learning dog. And I think if we started the conversation asking our parents, our business community, our school boards, what does learning look like today, and what prepares kids for today and tomorrow, and have them reflect on how much their workplace or their lives have changed, I think we'd have a better conversation. And too often that community conversation, we come up with a big vision that comes down on heaven from the superintendent or the school board without enough conversation with the community. So I maybe got a little distracted there on your specific question, but
I think that was it, Keith, and I love it that the tale of assessment to wag the learning dog. I think that that's a good one, and I think kind of sums up kind of what we're saying here from your perspective. So going back to Tom, you started to share something on the use of time there, Tom.
Yeah, just a couple pieces that haven't really been touched on yet that I think are vital on this concept of the use of time. And one is it really also gets to the notion of anytime, anywhere learning. We need to stop. We need to get out of the mindset that learning stops and starts with the school bells, because obviously we know that's not true. We know that the connectivity piece outside the school day is vital. But with that as well, some of the notion of this use of time comes those connectivity battles. And what are we doing for those students that are not connected? We're moving a lot of this digital. We cannot put kids in an environment where they leave school and they go home and then they can't access the resources that we had just been giving them. So that becomes an issue as well. When you're looking at the use of time, you also start to look at things like competency-based or mastery-based learning. It's fascinating in education where we've always said that kids learn at different rates and at different speeds, and then what do? We all give them 184 days a year at 7 hours a day. The exact same amount of time. So using time differently, districts are really starting to do. I know where I came from in Quakertown, Pennsylvania, we had developed a system, K-12, where students in secondary, 6 to 12, could take any combination of online or face-to-face classes that they want, so long that they were being successful. It allowed students to take additional coursework because we had opportunities online. By the way, those were all taught by our own teachers there in our public school. But that was one way we used time differently to be able to meet the needs of kids in a different environment. So it really also goes to that anytime, anywhere learning when you're talking about the use of time, and I just thought that was important. I will mention that anytime, anywhere learning is not also just for students. From going to Brian's point about professional learning, which I, excuse me, completely agree, sorry about that. Anytime, anywhere learning also needs to be opportunity for staff as well, and getting away from that one-size-fits-all hours-based approach. And I thought Brian was very spot on with that professional learning bit, but that relates back to the use of time for our teachers on that end as well.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that point of view. And while you're up, I want to ask you another question. As part of the Future Ready rollout, the Alliance has worked to create a Future Ready dashboard, a free planning tool for districts. I understand this resource includes resources from many of the coalition partners. Can you tell us a little bit more about that free tool that's available out there?
Sure, absolutely. And I have to give a shout out to McGraw-Hill and AT&T because they're the ones, their philanthropic arm funded this. And, it is not a sales pitch for them by any means. They wanted to support this free tool for all districts nationwide. And I will say, we've had a few hundred districts already do this, all of our, well, over 500 because everybody at the summit spends time doing this. What it is, it's a free resource that helps school districts truly come up with a comprehensive action plan in all of these different gear areas. We were just talking about use of time. That is one. Helping districts stop to just focus on the technology to include all the other aspects, things like community partnerships, which has already come up here, like professional learning, like the curriculum instruction and assessment, all the different areas. Also leadership being part of that. So the dashboard is a free tool for districts to take a 50,000-foot view self-assessment in all of the gear areas. In about 20 minutes or so, what happens is the data rolls over and districts get completely free scores on all of their different areas based on their self-assessment. What happens then, though, is then they receive a gap analysis which analyzes their assessments based on best practices and success and research and says, here's the gaps we've identified based on your assessments. We take it another level and we say, here are the strategies to close the gaps based on your self-assessments. And we worked with over 40 district leaders, successful leaders in this area for each of these different areas, such as data and privacy and what have you. But then really one of the key values is the resources that you just alluded to. You know, Keith's group at CoSN and Brian's group at ISTE has amazing resources. So we've created this spot where these coalition partners have shared what they've wanted to for districts that have come in there. So when you go in there, you see the coalition partner resources that are in there, free for schools to support their work. So if a school is struggling with the use of time, which we just referenced, which by the way is by far the one that districts are struggling with nationwide as a whole, you can go in and get all of these free resources from different organizations that focus in these areas. So not only do you get a comprehensive self-assessment and then also the gap analysis and strategies to support that, you now have the resources that are aligned to those areas. Furthermore, each one of the gear areas, like professional learning or use of time, have its own assessment available to districts. They're about a 30-minute deep dive, so a district could go in and say, we want all of our teachers to do the 30-minute deep dive on professional learning. And the district can go in there, they can create their own team code, they can go in and they can push it out to 400 teachers, and then they can aggregate a report. And the report has infographics and charts and based on rubrics and all those types of information to help districts systemically plan moving forward. We're already working with states that are starting to say, hey, we want to do this statewide, because think of the power in having all of this data. What I will do, and I need to point out, though, is our privacy policy on this. At the Alliance, we do a lot of work in the privacy area. And just to be crystal clear, the data is owned by the district. The data will never be marketed to. It'll never be sold. The SEA or the U.S. Department of Education does not have access to that data. That is specific and private for that district to use as a planning tool moving forward, all completely free. And there's a lot of other resources out there that it'll complement or supplement, but it is an incredible planning tool. At each one of the summits, we've gotten feedback from a few hundred people at each summit, and we continue to move forward where districts can recommend a resource or recommend a strategy, and we filter those through to create really an umbrella of a planning house for districts that, again, it really includes so much of the incredible work of all of these coalition partners. It's at dashboard.futurereadyschools.org. There's no catch. It is totally free. And again, a shout out to AT&T and McGraw-Hill for funding that so it can be totally free for all school districts nationwide. But a great tool to plan moving forward.
It really is a great tool, Tom, and that's why we wanted to spend a few minutes having you give us an overview of it. It's out there for schools. My wife's superintendent of a large district here in California. She got on there and she was amazed at what it was doing. So, you know, it really is a valuable tool. You talked about something at the first part of that, which comes down to the use of time and the time savings. We did a little assessment a while back that we used in talking to our legislators here in California. We figured out that the average principal, based on our survey that we went out that came to our site here at portical.org, how much time they saved coming and gathering resources there compared to going out and trying to do a search and compile them together. Like you said, there's a lot of good stuff out there, but what are vetted resources that are good? And that's a piece. We equated that to how much their salary is, how many hours a week versus how many a month. It was an astronomical amount of a figure, you know, that you're getting into $500,000 a month through the budget of California. I mean, you still have to pay their salary, but it's time they can spend in the room watching lessons. It's a time they can be more involved with the students. So I think that piece you're talking about, especially for the leaders, any time-saving tools, that's a valuable resource for us.
Right. You know, Roland, and along those lines there, all of our coalition partners and other resources and other partners that are out there that are, other organizations that are out there that may not technically be partners, so to say, have incredible resources. But as a recent tech director and a recent principal, you know, nobody's out there sitting at their desk saying like, gee, I wonder if this organization happens to have a resource and like just scouring web pages or whatnot. What happens is you get it because you have a relationship with somebody that passes it on to you or whatnot. There's so many things out there. It helps to filter it down for them, but now it's tied to specific areas. Looking for professional learning resources, you know, here's 25, and we're working on kind of social sharing so districts can vote resources up or vote resources down on that, but it really filters it through to be usable for districts because all the stuff that's going on out there is really good, but it helps them in one spot.
Okay, so I'm going to keep us moving ahead. We have about 15 minutes here left, and we have some questions we want to make sure we get to. Andrea and Keith, I would like to address this question to you. there is a lot in the framework, and one of the major areas that they're looking at is in data and privacy. And I know both your organizations have done a lot to help in the trainings that you've gone forward in looking at those two issues. Tell us from your perspective of what your organization has done to help districts as they look at these issues. We'll start with you, Andrea.
You're right. It's a huge issue, and we're working with a law firm here in California, Fagan, Friedman, Fullfrost. They've put together a checklist for technology contracts based on AB 1154, I think it was, where student privacy is there are certain aspects of that contract that have to be in place, and that's available on our website. We're also working with the TTSC group here in California with the county superintendents on a full privacy guide that sort of pulls together different laws and rules, and both California and federal, so that you can give that to somebody who's in charge of contracts, or your superintendent can look it over, and you can really go back and double check your contracts and make sure they have all the components they're supposed to have. We're also, sort of, sticking it, keeping it in front of Google and in front of Microsoft, and I know Q does a lot of that as well, making sure that they understand that, if you're going to call something Google Apps for Education, you have a responsibility to make sure that it's appropriate for education, and just partnering with groups like this, like with Q and CoSN and ISTE, it's all of that is so important that we work together and make sure it's all on the table there.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Keith, how about from your perspective, tell us a little bit about what CoSN has done to help in these areas of data and privacy.
Yeah, we've been very active over the last 2 years in an initiative called Protecting Privacy and Connected Learning. Certainly, there are really 3 buckets of things that we've been working on. One is around compliance, particularly at federal laws, and we've partnered with Harvard Law School, the Berkman Center there, to create a free toolkit on really helping people. A lot of these laws date back to FERPA back to the 70s, and COPA back to 2000, so they predated things like cloud computing and apps, but they are being applied in this world today. So there's that resource. Included in that are things that are like questions, suggestions of what you should include in contracts, questions you should ask around security, and we have a list of 10 things that every school district should be doing. A second bucket, though, is even if you are checking the boxes and doing compliance, that really doesn't instill confidence and trust. And I think a big effort of that has been starting to identify really what are aspirational practices. And probably the most exciting thing that we co-led with the Data Quality Campaign, 38 national organizations have now signed on, including all the ones I think on here today with ISTE and others, the teachers unions, the school boards, the chief state school officers, PTA, all saying, there are fundamental beliefs that we have around what data should be collected and what we will do and what we won't do. Now, that doesn't answer every specific question, but we need to really flip this conversation from one of privacy to one of trust, and that's really our third bucket, and that is how do we better communicate to parents. And so how do we, and there's a whole bunch of resources that we're starting to develop in that area, but I think too many school districts have felt that if they simply hide or ignore, or probably the only way they communicate in many cases to parents is with some sort of legal-like document, a student handbook or a acceptable use policies, and it really, asking parents or students to sign that doesn't really instill any confidence. So flipping that conversation, I think, is really important.
Thank you, Keith. I appreciate that. One of the things for our viewing audience out there, as you're listening to the panel today, every one of these folks that are joining us represent an organization that has a ton of great resources. If you go to the website for Future Ready Schools, look on, for this summit, look on speakers, you'll find links there to their websites and what they're talking about. But believe me, you talk about time savings, there's some great resources there. So check them out, and we'll put in a little plug here as we get a little bit later before closure. Community partnerships is another area that the framework hits, and I can't think of two organizations that have so many partners without looking at ISTE and CUE. I mean, you guys are just out there partnering all the time in these great areas. So what I'd like to do is, Keith, how do you? I'm sorry, Brian, how do you feel in moving forward with an organization like ISTE? How do you see the value that's out there to the school districts? What advice would you give them as far as moving ahead? And they're all going to say, hey, I don't have an Apple that's in my school district. I'm not fortunate like Silicon Valley. From your perspective, Brian, what would you say would be important message to get to those struggling leaders that are looking for that community partnership?
Sure. Well, first let me just say that Keith, the work that Keith and Kosan have done on the area that he was discussing is huge, and one of the threads he tied throughout all of his three buckets is it's all connected, is this notion of trust, and that's one of the challenges in here. We're trying to build relationship and communication and transparency of trust within the school, within the community, with business, with other partners. And that's, for us as human beings, is one of our greatest challenges. One of the great things about all the organization, Andrea is doing fantastic work. Everybody's doing great. Mike, of course, Q is phenomenal. There's more opportunity for us to partner and collaborate than there is time to do it. So all of us are always trying to figure out which is the right connection, the right opportunity in this moment, because we could all just spend the rest of our lives, with every waking moment trying to partner. So I know that's a challenge for all the folks here because we've talked about that. This notion of communication and trust and comfort with one another in the process of doing this within the partnership. Maybe it's a partnership, it was discussing about, Keith was talking about how we communicate with parents. How do we find a new and different way to communicate? How do we open the conversation? How is it not just a transactional communication? How do we do that? I think that's the huge part, and we're just beginning to figure that out. Part of it is helping each other in peer roles to be the best we can within those roles. When I'm out talking to, for example, administrators, and I have some folks say, I'm talking about how ISTE can be a resource to them. Some say, yeah, I know I'm plugged in and work with you guys. Some of the folks on our team are working. Or I have others who say, oh yeah, I have people who do that, right? We're beyond the time when we can say we have people who do that, because everybody has a role in that. And so as you're building partnerships at the local or regional or state or federal level or global level, it really does come down to trust and that human component that Keith was talking about, because we live in a world where we tend to value trust, but we tend to undermine it almost every time we open our mouths. And so we try very hard, and our human condition sort of undermines us sometimes. So I would say, if you're talking about partnership and communication, it really is about recognizing that we can't do it all. The groups here and so many more are all doing great work. How do we what's the analogy here? How do we quilt those pieces together to be of most service to the field as possible? Because if you look at all the work that these and other groups are doing, the Future Ready piece, we're so proud of the fact that Cheryl Nussbaum Beach on our board has been a really key part of Future Ready. How do we continue to get better at putting those pieces together and making them practical and accessible for our colleagues who want and need to use them?
Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate that. Mike, from your perspective, how would you view partnerships with Q, and any advice out there for our listeners in looking at partnerships moving forward of what to look for?
Absolutely. I think I would second much of what's been said in terms of it's about relationship and trust. I think in the area of partnerships, educators far too often seek out partners with their hands out. And they just say, what money can you give us, or what resources can you give us, without really doing the other half of partnership work, which is offering something. So what my advice typically has been when I reach out to school leaders and district leaders is find the resources within your school system, within your district, within your school community that are assets that you can offer up. We have available space at this campus. We have a gorgeous theater. We're able to make that available to a fellow nonprofit to come in and host an event. And we'd also like to have a chance for funds to be raised for our school program that's doing something while you're raising funds for your nonprofit, is just one example. But there are assets, there are resources within our community, and I cheer whenever I see a creative and innovative approach to partnerships when innovative school leaders, even something as crazy as I just saw a teacher do a lip sync dance with his entire student population through the school, and I think it was a great creative idea, but link it to something, point it to something. If that thing's going viral, let's link it to some initiative or a partnership or effort, because it is going viral and it's amazing, and that guy has some moves, I gotta say. I don't know if any of you saw the video I'm talking about, but that's the simple exchange that often is left out, and certainly there was a time when merely all you had to say is, we're the local school district, and what could you give us? And that was sufficient. I think that day has passed, and I think we need to be true partners and offer something up that's of value in exchange for those partnerships.
Thank you for that, Mike. And I know, just as Brian was saying and Keith alluded to, the partnerships, and when you start looking at building of trust, those are something that, it comes over time. Many of us here on this panel have worked together over years, and we have a feeling of trust. We can pick the phone up and call somebody, and that if you have an idea of partnerships, well, let's talk about this. So those kind of relationships do take those building, and I think, kind of given what you're saying, Mike, don't just go out the first time with your hand out. Let's start working on those relationships now, so we have that trust built. That's a good wisdom there, all of you. Thank you. So we're reaching a point here where we're getting closer, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to put a little challenge in front of you. You're each going to have 30 seconds now to try to give a brief answer on some of these questions, and we're going to move into professional learning. Keith, I have one for you. What are new skills that district education leaders need to make this digital leap that we're talking about? So from your perspective, what are some of those new skills? And if we can, 30 seconds or less.
Okay. Well, it's a big question, but I'll answer it specifically for those who have technology responsibility at a district level. And I think that the job is a hybrid position, and I think too often we see too many school districts that are still recruiting, when we look at job descriptions, as though they just need technical expertise. And in fact, that's one piece of what they need to know, but they need to really understand education and learning, and they really need to be leadership and vision. And I think we need to shift the conversation from kind of thinking of technology as a vertical department to how do we think horizontally and enable the enterprise, and that those roles shift, therefore. Roland, I'm not hearing you.
There we go. I keep trying to click the mouse here. So looking at what techniques, and this one will go back to Mike, 30 seconds here. What techniques can schools and districts use to create effective professional learning networks inside the school and outside the school?
All right, so I'm going to start by unmuting. Schools can create wonderful places of learning, and I think we mentioned it earlier that it's not just for the students, but we need to create professional learning environments that they can really claim as their own and be comfortable in. I just gave a TEDx talk on this topic where I am challenging us to reclaim the teacher's lounge and make it a yes and space where we are lifelong learners, and we collaborate and work together to support each other when we have ideas in the teacher's lounge instead of tear each other down and shoot down good ideas. And that's my 30 seconds.
Very good. All right, so going back to Tom, how do you build a community of practice, and what role do professional associations play in helping build a community of practice? And I'm also going to ask Andrea the same question here on this one.
Sure. Way to put you on the spot and give you 30 seconds, right? So what I would say, you know, there's so many great professional learning organizations that are out there that do a lot, you know, ISTE, CoSN in this area for their people, and I think their leadership has been incredible. Part of the difficulty is just helping the people, because of 17,000 school districts, it just actually get to the right people there. The key to professional learning is that ownership. It's getting away from the top-down, one-size-fits-all approach of sit and get PD to one where that ownership is key. And so it's about building relationships. It's about creating it where that ownership, they take charge of their own learning, and we got that. It's limitless in what they can do. And so it's really a cohesion of the organizations as well as them being able to take ownership of it. In 30 seconds or less, I guess that's the best I can do for that question.
That was great. And Andrea, coming back to you then, the same one. How does your organization help build community of practice? How does that work out?
Well, I think that I agree with what was said before about partnerships. I think no one organization can do it all. No one association can do it all. And each one of the organizations represented here today does things in a little bit different way. And if nothing else, get the word out on something we find out about that another association is doing. We try to get the word out if we think it's appropriate for our members. And I think everybody that's here today agrees that just keeping those lines of communications open between associations is really what's going to provide the most benefit for our members, and making sure that they can pick and choose. It's individualized learning for adults just the same way it is for children, and they need to be able to choose what they can do.
Thank you. And then one of the areas that, Brian, this is going to come to you because one of the things that came up earlier, you talked about the human factor, and it's kind of been a thread all the way along, building relationships and coming into play with real-world issues. And Brian, you're a lot like me. I know your wife's an educator, and I can only imagine what your discussions are like at home because I know what mine are like. How has that helped you in your role as the executive director, CEO of ISTE, having education just surrounded constantly in your daily life on a personal level?
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. Patty just finished her 34th year of teaching. We're going to celebrate our 34th anniversary next month. I first got into education nonprofit work in 1986, so I'm only 29 years into the business. I've been a school board member. I've worked for a lot of the nonprofits. Her path and my path have been absolutely complementary because we have had unique and distinct perspectives of very similar things. We both feel it's been good for both of us in our work because it has provided us with a broader view of the worlds in which we find ourselves on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's part of the opportunity that we have for each other in settings like this, is how do we really stop and listen? How do I, Roland, stop and listen to you and say, okay, help me think about this thing differently, Roland, because of what the experience was that you just had that you want to share with me. And how can I really stop and listen, truly listen? We're not all good at it, and even when we try, we sometimes forget. And how can I let you, inform me? Again, I'm going to tell you, that to me is the soul of ISTE as an organization and the people that come together here and provide those opportunities.
Wow. Well, you know what? You guys all did it in 30 seconds. You were able to add some real wealth there to the conversation. I think it's interesting that one of the items that came out that was a real aha for me today was the human factor that came up so many times, the trust, the working with individuals, taking part of helping people save time. It's very easy, I think, many times when you're have a large organization, you work with conferences that pull in thousands of people, and to go down to it's that individual person that for some reason the light came on for them today at your conference or in your workshop or a resource off your website. So I just want to thank all of you for being part of this, and in closing, let you know that I think your organizations are doing a wonderful job. We're so fortunate to have the caliber of leadership that we do. From a personal note, I can't tell you how many times over the course of a week I talk to people about your organizations. I utilize the resources. I'm just honored to be able to be here today and to help pull from you some of the great things that are in your mind, and I want to thank you for your leadership that you do with the organization. So thank you for participating, and at this point I'm going to turn it back over to Steve. Let me try that again. There we go.
Thanks, Roland. Thanks, everybody. Special thanks to Jason Borgen and Roland Baker. Just a terrific job today. Roland, watching you host a panel is watching a master, and I learned some things and I appreciate it. Thanks, Andrea, Keith, Mike, Brian, and Tom. You've all been great contributors, not just in this panel, but throughout this process. We really appreciate it. So we're now closing the 2015 School Leadership Summit on Future Ready Schools. The recordings will go up tomorrow. Those who registered will get links to the recordings. They'll be available on the website as well. Our significant appreciation to the partner organizations, to those of you on this panel, and to all who participated today. Thanks. Have a great night. Take care and bye.
Bye. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.